In today's video, I'm going to break down my early picks for the top 3 commons in each color for Brothers War Draft. These are cards that should be relatively high picks, serve as potential signals, and go well in lots of different decks. Let's get to it. So first up is white. Number 3, Scrapwork Cohort is a 4-mana 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. You can unearth it for 2 and a white. So this goes well in pretty much every white deck. It goes well in blue-white since it's a soldier and it creates another soldier. It goes well in green-white since that cares about artifacts entering the battlefield. You actually get 2 artifact triggers. And it goes well in red-white since you want to go wide. Not so well in black-white, but I still would play it there just because it's an efficient creature. It does have the artifact synergies with everything, so that's Scrapwork Cohort. Number 2 is going to be Disenchant. So it's 1 and a white. For an instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Obviously a classic reprint here. So this makes me think back to Theros Beyond Death that Return to Nature was put in. For 1 and a green, you could destroy an artifact, enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. Normally this is a sideboard card, but in Theros Beyond Death it was quite strong, considering how many enchantments were running around, and there was escape, so you could exile a card from a graveyard. I think Disenchant is going to be in a similar position. Most of the top end in the set is big artifacts. So having a Disenchant or 2 in your deck is going to be really powerful. There are also some enchantments running around. Some of the other top commons that we're going to get to are enchantment-based removal. So Disenchant should be pretty good in Brothers War. And number 1 is, again, one of those enchantments that I just mentioned, Prison Sentence for 2 and a white. It's an enchantment aura. You can enchant a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. And its activated abilities can't be activated. So that's a nice little add-on. And the scry 2, a little additional value. So this is just going to be solid bread and butter white removal. So that's number 1, Prison Sentence. So let's move on to blue. My pick for number 3, Scatter Ray is 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target artifact or creature spell unless its controller pays 4. So if you were playing Dominaria United, we just had Essence Scatter. Essence Scatter's been good in pretty much every set it's been printed in. I expect this to be in a similar position. Plus you get to target artifacts. Again, lots of artifacts running around that we'd want to counter, especially our top end. I think this could be a decent 2-drop. But if it ends up in your hand late in the game, 4 mana is enough that you'll still be able to nab something, especially if your opponent is tapping out for some 8 or 9 mana artifact. That's going to be a huge swing if you're able to pull that off. And again, you could just snap this off on turn 2 just to counter their 2-drop. So that's number 3, Scatter Ray. My pick for number 2 is Wing Commando. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human soldier. The soldier part is important. Has flying and prowess. What's nice about prowess is you can also trigger it by casting a spell during your main phase. So if you were to just play an artifact or enchantment, you could have this attack as a 3/3. And your opponent's really going to have a hard time blocking this. Of course, it has flying, but with the prowess, it's just going to be really difficult to put, a 3/3 in front of it. Plus Wing Commando and the red trick Whirling Strike to be able to give this trample plus a bump. This card's going to be pretty nice. So that's Wing Commando. And my pick for number 1 blue common is Weakstone's Subjugation. For 1 blue, you get an enchantment aura. You can enchant an artifact or a creature. And when it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 if you do tap Enchanted Permanent. And Enchanted Permanent doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So one of the ways to really get ahead in Limited is to double spell, and you're going to have some great turns with Weakstone Subjugation. If your opponent attacks in with something you want to target, you just cast this for 1 and then play another spell. You're going to get way ahead on board. And if you really need to tap something down, maybe you're on the offensive, you can just pay the extra 3 and tap their thing. So really nice that they give you that flexibility. So that's my pick for number 1, Weakstone's Subjugation. So on to black. Number 3, Scrapwork Rager. 4 mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So a slightly more expensive Phyrexian Rager, which is one of the best black commons from Dominaria United. This is always a solid type of creature, being able to put something onto the board and then replace itself. This one also has the added benefit of Unearth. So it's 3 and a black. You get to bring it back, give it haste, draw another card. Just a lot of value you can get from this thing. Plus, in black, you could also recur it maybe before you unearth it. So, maybe you emergency weld, bring it back to your hand, cast it again, and then unearth it. You can sacrifice it to things in black. So Scrapwork Rager is going to do it all. Number 2, the bread and butter black removal, 4 and a black instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Every black deck's going to want this. It will be better in certain archetypes where you can get more creatures into your graveyard if you build around it. This card is going to be absolutely insane. If you can play this for 1 mana, exile one of their things. So it's not just destroy, it's exile with all the unearthed creatures running around and lots of recursion in black. The exile is going to be relevant. But then on top of that, this could potentially cost 1 or 2 mana. Potentially just insane. Number 1, so I was kind of between picking Overwhelming Remorse for number 1 or this next card, but I did ultimately settle on Disfigure as the number 1 black common. 1 mana instant, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It's just always going to do what you want to do. There's sometimes Overwhelming Remorse will cost 5 mana and it will just be good, not great. Disfigure is always great. Just snap this off for 1 mana to kill their 2-drop, or, use this in combat in combination with your creature to kill something big. Disfigure is always going to be solid. You'll definitely want to pick these highly. Now on to red. My pick for number 3 red common is Pendragon Strongbull. 2 and a red for a 2/3 Minotaur. Pay 1, sacrifice an artifact. Pendragon Strongbull gets +1/+1 until end of turn and deals 1 damage to each opponent. So you're going to need to build around this a little bit, but let's imagine you have 1 or 2 Power Stones laying around on the battlefield that you've picked up from other effects. Your opponent's going to have a really hard time blocking this, so you're probably just going to get in for a couple of hits. Or at the end of the game, if you have a couple of artifacts laying around and you're an aggressive red deck, let's say your opponent stabilized at 2 or 3 life, you play Pendragon Strongbull and then sacrifice your board, you just win the game on the spot. So I think this is going to end a lot of games. Very solid 3-drop. That's number 3, Pendragon Strongbull. My pick for number 2, best red common, Scrapwork Mutt. It's a 2 mana 2/1 artifact creature dog. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And it has Unearth for 1 and a red. So just a solid 2 mana 2/1. You're going to be able to filter, discard maybe some lands to draw additional gas if you're an aggressive deck. Again, get all the benefits of artifacts entering the battlefield. If you need those triggers, you can sacrifice it and unearth it later. This will be nice to unearth late in the game. Maybe you top deck a land, you just unearth, discard the land to hopefully draw into spells. So lots of utility for Scrapwork Mutt. That's number 2. Number 1, Excavation Explosion. 2 and a red sorcery. Excavation Explosion deals 3 damage to any target. Create a tapped Power Stone token. So this might just be the best red common, even if it didn't have create a tapped Power Stone token. 3 mana sorcery, deal 3 damage to any target. You would still play that in every single red deck. But you also get the Power Stone, so tons of additional value from this card. Easily the best red common. On to green. Number 3 is Argothian Opportunist, 2 and a green for a 3/2 creature human scout. When Argothian Opportunist enters the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token. So similar to Excavation Explosion, you wouldn't necessarily just play this card if it was 2 and a green 3/2, but it's not horrendous. But then you get the tapped Power Stone token. That's really nice in green. Green-white cares about artifacts entering the battlefield. Green-blue wants to ramp. And then green-red also cares about Power Stone. So being able to play this card in pretty much every green archetype is going to be really solid. That's Argothian Opportunist. Number 2 is Blanchwood Prowler. 1 and a green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among the cards milled this way into your hand, and if you don't, put a +1/+1 counter on Blanchwood Prowler. So it's just going to smooth your draws, draw you into lands, make sure you hit your land drops. If you remember Eccentric Farmer from Midnight Hunt, that was a very solid card, a very high pick in green. And again, the fail case here, if you miss, which is unlikely considering how many lands you have in your deck, 3 cards gives you a really good chance to hit one. You still end up with a 2 mana 2/2, which is not embarrassing. I would play a 2 mana 2/2 and not be embarrassed. So that's number 2, Blanchwood Prowler. And number 1, Epic Confrontation. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. Very easy pick for best green common. This goes in every green deck. The difference between +1/+1 and +1/+2 is actually massive. So knowing that Epic Confrontation is the top green common is helpful, but you also need to know how these cards work in context. Go ahead and check out my Brothers War Quick Start Guide here, where I break down the 10 different archetypes and show you how these cards work in those specific decks.